Alright, we're back with 5 crazy neighbor horror stories. I couldn't find the other video, so we're just gonna use this one made by the same guy, Mort. He does do a lot of these, so shout out to him. This one looks cool, by the way. It has like 500,000 views and all that. So yeah, also we're gonna stray a bit back from the animated horror stories a bit, because I feel like I it's not really my thing. I mean, it's a lot simpler and all that, but you know, there's heaps of horror games out there, and just not even horror content. I guess just gaming. Yeah. So let's get into it. Without further ado.
A few years ago, I came home from work to find my girlfriend sitting on the couch with a glum look on her face. When I asked her what the matter was, she gave me that fateful line. We need to talk.
Ooh, you're getting divorced.
She told me she wasn't happy
Okay.
in our relationship anymore and that she thought that we should take a break to see other people, essentially so we could decide if we really were supposed to be together.
Well, you're breaking up.
I really didn't want to, but I loved her enough to respect her decision and I agreed.
Oh.
I thought if I at least gave her idea a try, I'd eventually win her back, but a few weeks later our relationship was well and truly over.
She's with
And
another
I
guy.
had to move out of the apartment that we shared.
Oh, jeez.
Since it was technically her apartment first, obviously I had to find a new place to live, and fast. So I definitely didn't take all the time I should have to find somewhere decent, and I ended up paying for it pretty badly.
Jeez.
The place I ended up renting was a one-room studio apartment in a building that straight up looked like a haunted house. I mean, that probably should have been a warning right there, but it was cheap, available, and the landlord only wanted a month's rent in advance to exchange for the keys. Plus, there was absolutely no way I was about to move back in with my mom and dad.
I
Like,
wouldn't
they'd
have
be
done that.
nice enough to offer, but it would have felt
Oh.
like way too much, like a step back, and so I opted for the studio.
Mm-hmm.
Moving in was easy enough. I didn't have all that much in the way of possessions to take with me, and honestly, I just couldn't be bothered arguing with my then ex-girlfriend about who was entitled to what. The whole thing had been unpleasant enough without souring the broken relationship even further with petty arguments over furniture.
Jeez.
Besides, as long as I had my Xbox and my 4K telly, I'd be happy enough. So the day
I like
after
that
I move in,
mentality.
I knock at the flat across the hall from me to introduce myself
Very
to my
bad, though.
neighbor. There was this thumping bass beat coming from the other side, so I knew someone was home. But when they answered, I was pretty shocked at how frank and unfriendly they were.
Want to know the best way to potentially make a big income online? By making
The guy was quite young, with thick dark beard
Guy
and
doesn't
a
look
Cockney accent, and he didn't open the door the whole way. He just opened like a little crack before peering out. I introduced myself, told him I moved in across the hallway from him, and added that if he ever needed to borrow a cup of sugar or anything, he knew where to find me.
What
But
a
all I got in
kind
return
neighbor.
was this cold, nervous stare. I figured I might have interrupted him in something, so I apologized and added that my name was Ollie.
Ali.
He replied, telling me his name was Jack. I know this sounds mad, but I got the distinct impression it was a name that he just plucked out of the air. Just something in my gut told me that, as weird as this sounds, and that he just made it up on the spot. But I'm not really the paranoid type, so I just put it down to him being a generally awkward person or whatever before I disappeared back into my flat. A few weeks later, I was just leaving my flat to head off to work when
You look
I saw a
different.
guy leaving Jack's flat.
Oh.
I wished him a good morning, and he wished me the same, and I followed up by asking him if he was one of Jack's friends or his flatmate or something. "Who?" he replies. It was then that I smelled the alcohol in his breath. I repeated the question, pointing towards the door of the flat and reiterating that it was Jack's flat. "Oh, yeah, I'm Jack's mate," he said,
Sounds like an
before
Aussie.
continuing down the stairs and out the front door.
G'day, mate.
Now, this one I definitely knew was a lie, and it was that which clued me into the fact that the original guy had been lying to me too. Something weird was going on with that flat, but just exactly what it was, I couldn't possibly imagine at that stage.
Something sus.
So, this keeps happening for about a fortnight longer, with me catching different people going in and out of the flat across the hallway at all hours of the night. So when the landlord calls to pick up the next month's rent, I bring up the tenants from across the hall and ask him exactly who it is that lives there. He racks his brain for a moment, finally coming up with the name Stephen as the name of the tenant,
Stephen.
adding that he's the best tenant he's ever had. How there are no noise complaints, how he always pays the rent on time and on the first day of every month via direct debit deposit into his bank account. I was on the verge of telling him all about the different people I'd seen, but it wasn't really any of my business, was it?
Not really.
I mean, yeah, it was probably something a bit dodgy going on over there, but as long as no one was getting hurt, what did it have to do with me? I'm not a grass, so I've never been. It's just not my nature, so I kept my gob shut, even though in time I'd really, really wish that I hadn't. About a week later, I was asleep in bed when something woke me up, a sound coming from outside my flat. It was of heavy footfalls on the stairs, and somehow I knew it was something to do with the flat across the hall.
Stefan.
As I lay there all blurry-eyed, I finally decided that I was going to put a complaint into the landlord, but was nearly scared out of my skin when I heard a series of loud bangs on the front of my flat. "Merseyside Police! Open the door, or we smash it in!" My heart began to race, so hard that I could actually hear it pumping in my ears. I was frozen to the spot for a moment, and it took another few bangs and another shock before I could even get my head together. I ran to the threshold, pulling back the mortise lock before opening up the door. The next thing I know, there's a torch in my face, completely blinding me as a pair of armed, tactically dressed policemen storm into my flat and throw me to the ground. "Hands behind your back! Move and you're getting shot," one screamed, not even waiting for me to obey him as he pulled my hands into the small of my back and placed them in cuffs. "Get the bloody light on, Rich," he said to the other policeman, pulling me up onto my knees and telling me to stay put. So I'm up on my knees, facing the door of my flat, with the other officer keeping his back against the door, drawing it open. I can see that there is another pair of police officers who have been banging on the door of the flat across the hall, only there's no reply from inside. No one comes to open the door. So up comes this other policeman with one of those door basher things. I don't know the proper name, only that one of the police called it the big key. They smashed their way into the door, screaming as they went. I figured they start dragging out whoever was in there, or at least being as aggressive as they were with me.
But no one.
But bizarrely, it was almost the opposite tone. It was verging on kind and caring, and I listened in confusion as they asked the person, "Are you all right? Do you know where you are? Can you hear me?" It was a minute or so later I watched in absolute horror as one officer walked out of the flat carrying a girl who couldn't have been any older than a teenager. She was barely dressed, covered in bruises, and her hair was a greasy mess that was plastered to her scalp.
The heck?
I looked up at one of the officers, a look of pure shock and revulsion on my face. "Let me guess, you didn't know anything about it. Why don't you just save it for the interview?" he says. But I didn't. I swear to God I didn't. And I told the police who questioned me down at the station the exact thing when they asked me all sorts of things about human trafficking rings. I broke down in tears when they tried to get me to admit that I was the ringleader or something, and swore blind that I had no idea what they were talking about, and that I'd never do anything like that, and that I just didn't have it in me. Eventually, they let me go, satisfied that I didn't have anything to do with it, but I was horrified that something like that couldn't have been going on right under my nose, that I'd smiled and joked with some of the scumbags that I'd frequented that flat, completely unaware of the hellishly cruel things they'd been getting up to inside of it. I ended up moving back in with my mom and dad not long after. I just couldn't live in that place anymore, and I couldn't cope with looking for a new place, not with the intense paranoia of not knowing what was going on behind the closed doors all around me. So please, as much as it might go against all of your F the police mentalities, just call the police if you think something weird is happening like that near you, because it is our business. It's all of our business, and that decision might be the difference between someone's freedom and an existence of pure torture.
Well, there's a difference between that and being a Karen. So watch your neighbors, everyone. I'm watching you, Joan. Anyway, that was short. I don't really. Damn it. Well, there we go, everyone. The last scary story, neighbor animated kind of thing we'll do in a while. We're gonna go back to video games. Kind of like, I still upload the good old Pokemon stuff, but that's getting a bit. I enjoy that, you know. Getting a shiny Hitmonlee soon. Anyway, if you joined that, like and subscribe and all that. And yeah, see you next time, mate.